1968 was one of the rare presidential elections in modern American history in which a third-party candidate actually did all right. Segregationist former Alabama Governor George Wallace basically swept the South in 1968 as a candidate for the American Independent Party. He won 5 states on a populist and just straight-up racist segregationist platform. And during that campaign, George Wallace reserved for a particular target of his wrath the United States Supreme Court. The court then was led by Chief Justice Earl Warren. The Supreme Court under Chief Justice Earl Warren had ended legal racial segregation in the United States. It had established Miranda rights, so criminal suspects are made aware of their rights immediately upon arrest. The Warren Court made it the law of the land that defendants have the right to legal counsel. Imagine the horror. Well, George Wallace hated it all.
The Supreme Court of our country has handcuffed the police. They have rendered decisions today that are absolutely ludicrous and asinine. Turn people loose every day who are self-proven and confessed murderers of 5 or more people. You read about it, you've seen it. And when they turn somebody loose who's a self-proven murderer of 5 or more people, some pseudo-intellectual tells us that really he's not to blame. Society's to blame because his papa didn't care him to see the Los Angeles Rams play when he was a little boy, and he's mad with folks.
One reason we've had a breakdown of law enforcement has been the Supreme Court of the United States has, by reflection upon the integrity and morality of the police of this country, made it impossible to convict a criminal, made it impossible to arrest one, and today in the large cities of our nation you cannot walk the streets of public parks without fear of physical molestation, because if you arrest someone today, they try the policeman on Monday instead of the criminal.
George Wallace did not win the presidential election in 1968, but he did all right. He did better than you might think. 5 states. I mean, he did well enough in 68 that he scared the Republicans that he might take so many of their voters he would cost them the election. But with his rhetoric on the Supreme Court in particular, he pushed the Republican nominee that year much further to the right on that specific issue of the court. The Republican nominee that year was Richard Nixon, who, believe it or not, had started off as a California moderate, even a liberal by contemporary Republican standards. But soon enough, Richard Nixon was out there on the campaign trail doing his best George Wallace. He started talking about the forgotten Americans, the non-shouters, the non-demonstrators that are not racists or sick, that are not guilty of crime that plagues the land. Nixon called them the real voice of America, and he pitched himself as the law and order candidate. He went hard right on the Supreme Court in particular. He promised to appoint Supreme Court justices who would overturn the recent Supreme Court rulings from the Warren Court about Miranda rights and public defenders and all the rest of it. He said he would restore the country to a system of law and order with conservative judges. That was part of Nixon's Southern strategy. That was part of his plan to peel off George Wallace's supporters to make them his own. And Chief Justice Earl Warren saw what was happening. He saw that Richard Nixon, a frontrunner for the presidency, was threatening to roll back everything the Warren Court had accomplished, that it was becoming a big campaign issue, and Nixon was going hard right on that issue. He saw it coming. And so in June 1968, just a few days after Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated, Chief Justice Earl Warren told the president, Lyndon Johnson, that he was going to retire as soon as possible, as soon as a successor could be named. Chief Justice Warren did not want to run the risk that it would be Richard Nixon who might win the election and thereby get the opportunity to replace him on the Supreme Court. He said he was out. So in 68, Lyndon Johnson suddenly has an opportunity to choose a Supreme Court justice. This is just a few months before the presidential election. And he wasn't going to get to pick not just any justice, he would get to pick a chief justice. And so Johnson decided that he would elevate somebody who was already on the bench, who was already on the Supreme Court as an associate justice. And it was a complete disaster. Abe Fortas had only been on the Supreme Court for a couple of years. He was actually an old friend of Lyndon Johnson's. And when President Johnson announced that he wanted to elevate Abe Fortas from a regular associate justice seat to chief justice months before the presidential election, Republicans put up the wall, slow-walked the Fortas nomination hearings. And when the hearings finally did take place, Senators learned that not only had Justice Fortas been hanging around the White House for meetings and pressuring certain senators who opposed the Vietnam War, something that Supreme Court justices are not supposed to involve themselves in, they also learned that Fortas had been taking money from a local university to teach a course. He'd been moonlighting. The university had been paying him a stipend worth 40% of his salary on the court. Soon, Democrats started taking back their support one by one, and ultimately Fortas had to withdraw from consideration to be Chief Justice. Went back to his old job of just being a plain regular justice on the court. And that meant President Johnson had to withdraw the nomination that he had made to replace Fortas on the assumption that Fortas would be moving up to chief. So that meant that President Johnson in 1968, outgoing Democratic President Lyndon Johnson, went from having 2 chances to change up the Supreme Court to name 2 new justices, including a chief. He went from 2 chances to no chances. The Abe Fortas nomination was a bust and a political disaster. They sort of tried to game the whole thing, and they just blew it. And sure enough, Nixon did, in fact, win the 1968 election. And because of that failure by the Johnson administration to successfully appoint a new Supreme Court Chief Justice to the bench, so Nixon wouldn't get to, Nixon ultimately got to. He was able to follow through on his campaign promise to appoint conservative judges who pledged to dismantle the legacy of the Warren Court. By the time Nixon took office, so much more had come out about Abe Fortas' questionable ethics that he actually had to resign from the court entirely. May 1969, Fortas left the court, so Nixon got to pick Abe Fortas' replacement for an associate justice on the court. And then, of course, he got to replace Earl Warren as chief, who said he resigned and it would take effect as soon as he had a successor. Well, Nixon got to pick his successor. And with that, Richard Nixon took the liberal Earl Warren court and made it shift abruptly right, almost overnight. All because the effort to try to head that off in 1968 got botched so badly. LBJ screwed it up, and George Wallace, in a way, got his wish. There is a lot about the Trump era in American politics and in Republican politics that is totally unprecedented. The concern about the Supreme Court right now and what could happen there next, the unbelievably consequential fight over the newly vacant court seat that is now the new background to this year's midterm elections, this is not one of those unprecedented Trump-specific things. This is the sort of thing that has happened before. We have lived through this before, mistakes and all, warts and all. This is one of those times when this is history happening all over again, 50 years later. How all the players handle it this time, we will see. But presumably everybody in the country is going to be working on it one way or another over these next incredibly crucial 4 months.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.